no survivor got to actually tell their story. And Michael has mentioned the cathartic elements of coming forward and all of that. No, how is that even possible? 82,000 people came forward, high-priced lawyers, bankruptcy judge in Delaware, major American institution that has a congressional charter, and never in that entire effort, that massive effort, did a survivor get to testify and tell their story. How is that even possible? So what does success look like here? I mean, we just put their stories on the 200 million person platform around the world. It started for me. I didn't know anything about it. I guess like everybody, I'd heard maybe some small news stories, but I was making a short film with an entirely different subject. This billionaire in Idaho was trying to discredit some news stories in the Idaho Falls Post Register, and I was creating a film about interference in the press, and so I was kind of focused on that, and then I looked at what those stories were about, and they were about a local Boy Scout troop and a young man who had come forward to talk about what had happened to him and had gotten a bunch of it had gotten this person, Brad Stoltz, to get arrested, who turned out to be a serial pedophile. He had 23 other kids came forward at the same time. And so that was shocking to me. And so I was really moved by this person's story. And so it became a very different film because of that. I talked to him, this man, Adam Steed, and I began to understand this and then question why this figure in the community would want to discredit these stories. Why would he care? And so trying to uncover that, which says something about how a community reacts to these sorts of stories, was my sort of entree into this, I guess. And during that process is when the Boy Scouts declared bankruptcy, and that's around when we were finishing that film, is around when 82,000 people came forward, and that just seemed so out. Just I don't think I could even really process it, to be honest. I didn't understand what that meant. How did that many people come forward? I just coming from a place of knowing a little bit about the story because of the short film, that number seems so big that I just felt like I got to figure out what's happening here.
Kind of going off that a little bit, is there something through this documentary that you learned about survivors of sexual abuse, or more particularly male survivors of sexual abuse, and their unique experience as a survivor as a male?
Yes, I had done a film called Trials of Gabriel Fernandez, so I was somewhat used series, and I was somewhat used to, I think, trying to understand sensitivities of these more difficult kind of areas of and respecting people's experiences and what they went through, and trying to respectfully find a way to put those on camera and talk to them. So I had some experience with that, but this was different. This is as Michael can tell you, and we learned from talking to him, men don't disclose this kind of activity typically until they're in their mid or in their 50s. And I think it's clear to everybody that there's a societal stigma when it comes to this kind of thing, especially for men. And so that's an extra layer of complexity that I think you had to learn. That's specific, maybe not specific to this story, but certainly plays out in a very important way in this story.
Brian and his team, he is grossly underestimating the level of sensitivity that he and his team were able to bring not only to Scouts Honor, but even the trials of Gabriel. You're talking about dynamics of severe trauma, whether it's sexual trauma or child fatality or what have you. And that is not something that the average person, no disrespect for any filmmaker or whatever, but regular people get or understand. And when you're talking to people that have experienced this directly or indirectly, like a parent of a child, if you will, that's deep, and it's compelling, and it can be very personal, right? Especially if you're a parent. And so you're sitting there trying to do your job. I can imagine them sitting there trying to do his job, if you will, of asking good questions, but you're seeing this pain on these people's faces. And one of the things that, again, Scouts Honor did a fantastic job was, you know, Brian knows how to ask the question and really sit back and let the person from a place of total safety tell their experience. And that's hard. That's a hard thing to do, to sit and go through it. And so that's one of the things that, at a whole different level that's really special about Scouts Honor.
Brian, like you said, you did the trials of Gabriel Fernandez, you did the Turning Point, 9/11, War on Terror. So kind of what you were alluding to, Mike, is Brian, like, you've been around a lot of people with a lot of trauma, right? Regardless of the type of trauma, a lot of trauma that they have been through. So in your experiences working with these people and telling these stories, do you view trauma differently than you used to?
Wow, that's a good question. During this process, I read that book, the Body Keeps the Score, and yeah, I mean, I guess yes is the straight ahead answer. Very much so. Every film, every project you do, you learn a little bit more. You kind of understand the situation quite a bit more. I mean, I think my approach comes from trying to, first of all, establish just a very basic interview setup that's as comfortable as possible. A lot of times we try to minimize the number of people in the room. We try to make it conversational. I'm not asking, I'm not trying to ask pointed interviewee type questions. I'm trying to more have a conversation, trying to figure out if people, you get, it's sometimes a strange situation, because people do want to tell their stories and they want to share their experiences, but that just has to be the right kind of environment to do that. So that's the main thing. But it also comes from just my belief, sort of a personal belief that that this is a good thing, that it may be painful, but coming forward and sharing what happened does lead to change, and it leads to other people that may be suffering in silence, understanding that they're not alone.
Agreed. And I think that's especially so important with male survivors. And there's still that really strong stigma that's out there and that culture. And so I think this is an amazing way just to help male survivors in particular feel less alone, and like what they're going through, it's okay. Your feelings are valid and normal. So I think that's incredible. So,
Well,
as oh, sorry, go ahead, Mike.
his Brian's experience was completely validated. You had at least two men literally say, this is the first time we've really talked about this outside of this very small circle, and not only talk about it, but you could see that they felt a strength from talking about it.
Yeah.
So that's a thing, and that was very, very compelling. One of my many very favorite parts of the documentary. I mean, you have men that have gone through severe sexual trauma from a child, never resolved it, never really talked to anybody about it, literally saying, this is the first time I've talked about it, smiling and feeling good about it. People pick up on that. They may not be able to articulate it, but they pick up on that. That was powerful.
Yeah, exactly what Michael's saying. I mean, one of the things that struck me is that, in the bankruptcy process, this was about 3 years, right? That of fierce battles between lawyers, factions, and people were fighting over this. But this was a Chapter 11 bankruptcy process in which the goal of a Chapter 11 is to have the organization exist at the end. Chapter 7, it's all over. Chapter 11 is the whole goal is to have an organization survive. How do you figure out the assets so that at the end of that process, it's still able to operate? In that 3 years, all of those arguments, all of those courtroom proceedings in Delaware, some of them were virtual with the pandemic and stuff like that. Some of them were in person. But 3 years of this, fierce fighting, lots of lawyers, lots of money being spent on lawyers, lots of discussion. In my view, underreported, but lots of people involved. In that entire process, as far as I can tell, not a single survivor told their story. In court, not testified, nobody. And there's 82,000. So that shows you what the trial was about. It was about money. It was about assets. It was about lots of other things. But the survivors were not central, and they didn't even get to tell their story. So I'm proud that people came forward and talked to me, but I don't think it should take a Netflix film in order to get these stories out there. I think it should have happened before this.
Agreed. Completely agree. So as I was watching the documentary, I will say I was surprised because a few things shocked me, and I'm sure Mike can relate to this. Sometimes when you've worked in the space we work in, it can be kind of hard to be shocked because you've heard so many horrific stories of abuse, but there were a few pieces in this that did shock me. And I was just wondering, as you were going through the process, the production process, and hearing these stories, was there anything in particular for you that you found incredibly shocking or surprising that you weren't expecting to uncover or hear?
Well, Michael makes this point in the film, and I think it's really, really important. What is this really about, right? Well, what are the details here? People talk about, and I think actually when I talked to Michael about this, and when he said this on camera, it opened the door and created a window here for us to say, well, that's right. What is this about? We're talking about sexual abuse, but this is graphic details with children. I think we have a tendency, it's maybe these details are so horrible that we have a tendency to just say, oh, it's child sexual abuse and it's a this or that, or somehow you get a sense that we're glossing over it somehow, and it's not doing justice to what it actually is. And so I think most people were most of the victims were willing to kind of go there and understand what they were and tell us what happened. And I think that's important because in a way, sometimes our discussion about it and the way we phrase these things, we forget what it's really about and what really happened, how horrific these felonies and these crimes and this violence was.
Yeah, I come at this as a much differently. I know exactly what it looks like from hearing from victims and working, investigating them and listening, going to crime scenes and looking at the evidence and even interrogating perpetrators and them telling me in detail, which is what I always seek to do as an investigator, what they did to kids. So I've been doing that for 24 of my 28 years in law enforcement as a detective. One of the things that I have come to really learn, and society is learning this too, that survivors want to tell their story. They need to tell their story. Now there's a dynamic of should they, are they in an okay place to do that? But one of the things about male survivors, because they are so relegated in the area of trauma and being males that were sexually abused, it's only recently really that we've really heard their story. We've heard women have been pioneers in talking about victimization for decades, but really and truly, how many men have we really heard from. And the men that I know that have been sexually abused, both in scouting as well as in my previous casework, when you really sit and talk to them, and I'm sure Brian will tell you this, they want everybody to know everything that happened to them. I mean, everything, all of the details. And it just really hit me that people really don't understand. That's why I kind of talked about it. Sexual abuse is PG. I mean, it's PG. Sexual abuse is triple X, people. I mean, however, you know, I'm going to use a movie rating because I think that's a good a way of explaining it, but it's the truth. And so unless you're uncomfortable hearing the term sexual abuse, you're not thinking about what happened to these men, right? You're not thinking about what happened to these men when they were boys by this trusted adult, idealized adult, that the parents like, trusted, the church like, trusted, probably were getting awards. If you ever read through the perversion files and the ineligible volunteer files, a lot of these men got awards recognized in their communities, in scouting, in their church, or what have you. And here you are, 8, 9, 10, 12 years of age, and this individual has chosen you for these special activities and what have you, and obviously purely for the purpose of sexually gratifying themselves. Until we really delve into that, that's where you start to, you know, really feel it. I'll be honest with you. One of the things I love about this film, it got men crying. And I'm not talking just about the survivors. I've had several of my colleagues call and that work in the field. And this is a fantastic job Knappenberger and his team did of getting men to really get in touch with what has happened to them, as well as what it may have happened to their friends. I think the men in this film did a fantastic job. The survivors, oh my gosh, they did a fantastic job.
I think what Michael just said is so important and so key to the film. I mean, it really is. That basic courage to come forward and to talk about this in a way that's real. That's the key. That's the key to, I think, people responding to it, understanding it, not ignoring it, hopefully, anymore. You know, this story, I don't know why in the last 3 years it hasn't been a bigger story. It should be one of the biggest stories of the last few years, and it just hasn't been. So I just hope that that courage is what sparks it.
You know, Brian, you've worked on so many projects, you've met so many people. I'm curious if you have a pretty good instinct pretty quickly when you're interviewing someone, if they are being honest, if they have rose-colored glasses, if they're holding something back. I'm just very curious to hear, is that something that over the years you start to get down pretty quickly, like, oh, this person's holding something back?
Yes. I do think that's something I think about a lot. And I do think that's a part of, you know, you do different kinds of interviews. Some of them, as is also referenced in Scouts Honor, are somewhat adversarial. But yes, I think you do have to be skeptical. But I don't know if it's really coming from a place of direct criticism or attack. You know, it's just listening, right? It's just hearing what's being said, comparing it to what you already know, what other people have told you, and then pushing back and trying to figure out the truth, taken as a whole. And I think that's just what you have to do. You have to take it in, think about it, respond and engage in a conversation with that person. And you know, that's how it gets to the next level of truth, I think. That kind of pushing back.
In my law enforcement career, I've had to talk to a lot of people in a lot of situations, and you just learn things. And one of the things I definitely appreciate about Brian is they prepared for that interview. You know, all the interviews, let's put it that way. But he definitely prepared. And you know, you learn that if you ask somebody is the weather good today? Is the sky blue? And they start talking about Ford Mustangs. You kind of get an idea they don't want to talk about the topic of the weather, right? And I'll let Brian expand on that. That's a thing, especially in how they're doing it and their body language and posturing and all of that. So if you were to talk to my family members, they will tell you I can't turn it off, and I try to be just regular, normal person. But for me, it's a constant thing. But it's kind of hardwired for my career.
One thing I would just add to that is that Michael's right. We do prepare, and I just want to call out Sabrina Park and Connor Fetting-Smith and the rest of the kind of research team here, and not take the full credit for that myself. We really did have a team here that was really passionate about this film and working very, very hard to do that, and just totally dedicated to that process. The other thing I would say is I try to honestly portray the opinions of people who disagree with me or maybe on the other side of a position of mine. And so that's something that I'm as laser focused as I can be throughout the whole process, including editing, that I don't want to get their position wrong. That's different, of course, than disagreeing or something else. I want, even if it's whatever their position is, it has to be portrayed by us accurately. And I do hope that we did that with the Boy Scouts here and with the McGowan interview. I hope that is true, that what you're seeing on the screen is exactly their position as portrayed to us in that interview. That's a really big deal, I think, for the whole team as well.
Absolutely. And I commend you for, getting him to interview. I think that added a really nice element of just hearing his side versus, Mike Johnson, what you said. I found that incredibly interesting. And I'm just curious, how was that process getting him just in front of the camera?
I'm very glad that they talked to us. I think the film is richer. I think the understanding of what happened is richer because of that. I'm very appreciative that they talked. It was a process of trying to get them to go on the record here. But again, I hope we got that position correctly. I do think, what you see in the film is how it was portrayed to us, that they do see this problem of child sexual abuse as being, or at least the way they answered was, society. This is a society-wide problem, churches and schools and other things, and that the Boy Scout is just a part of that problem. And I just think that's a dangerous deflection in this case. But I didn't repeat those clips. It's not like we took the same clip and kept playing it. That those were variations on a theme, and that's the thing we kept getting from them. But I very much disagree with. I don't think the facts bear that out at all. This isn't like other things we've seen. The numbers are much greater. Michael has pointed out, I think, it's such a perfect way the unique vulnerabilities of the Boy Scouts that just don't exist in other youth serving organizations. To conflate this or to compare this to other parts of our society is just incorrect. It's just not, and it's not good leadership to look at a problem like this and to sort of say, well, everybody's got the same problem. Well, first of all, no, but second of all, there's something very serious going on here that needs to be addressed. I am just endlessly thankful that people have come forward and told their stories. I just think this is you said courage is maybe overused, but this is the example of it. It's the people that came forward, the survivors, the victims. And by the way, Michael Johnson, who entered the Boy Scouts already an expert in this field. So we've got a lot to learn from a lifetime of experience here, but was also the eyes and ears inside this organization, important American organization. He gave us a glimpse inside them, trying to think about, understand this problem, and how they dealt with this problem. So, and then for him to step away from the Boy Scouts to make the kind of decision that he made is a extraordinary act of courage, and then to go on the record about it and talk about it and fight for these sorts of things the way he continues to do is incredibly inspirational. You've asked me a lot of questions, but what do? I just listen to amazing people and try to figure out a way to tell the story and then convey that to people, could put that in front of people and in a way that helps other people understand it, to bring it a platform. But the courage comes from the survivors. It comes from people like Michael Johnson. It comes from people who did the hard thing here, did the difficult move here to tell the truth, to go against a cherished, powerful organization, to stand up and say and do the right thing. So it's all about that.
You work on so many projects with different people, different stories, different environments. But is there one way that you look at, like, this is what success looks like for me at the end of a project? Like, how do you define success for your projects?
Well, I'm in an industry that looks at numbers obsessively. That's just the weird business I'm in. It is a bizarre business. But I think what you have to do in cases like this, and I was thinking about this, is that, I mean, I mentioned this earlier, but it hit me. Yes, like, no survivor got a chance to tell their story for 3 years in a bankruptcy process that was about child sexual abuse. No survivor got to actually tell their story. And Michael has mentioned the cathartic elements of coming forward and all that. No, how is that even possible? 82,000 people came forward, high-priced lawyers, bankruptcy judge in Delaware, major American institution that has a congressional charter, and never in that entire effort, that massive effort, did a survivor get to testify and tell their story. How is that even possible? So what does success look like here? I mean, we just put their stories on a 200 million person platform around the world. So do the numbers matter other than those? I don't, not to me.
Keep doing it. I think the man and his team bring an incredible amount of credibility and passion to this work. I've talked to numerous survivors, both in the film and who've watched it. They feel like they were honored. I don't care the numbers and all that. That's a big deal for male survivors of sexual abuse. And so, and nobody talks about what that looks like. And you've honored them. And, thank you for telling their story, their experience, and shining a light where continued light needs to be shined to protect current scouts and future scouts, let alone what you just so wonderfully talked about, the past 82,209 scouts that still haven't had an opportunity to not only tell their story, but get help, get support.
Yeah.
I mean, this is an American tragedy right here in front of us, and still no investigation, no solutions, no answers. And Boy Scouts has the bankruptcy right to continue to exist without any accountability.